All right, well, good morning. You can be seated today. It's good to have you here with us this morning. If you have a Bible, turn to Mark chapter 10. While you're turning there, I have a quick question for you. Who shows up for you when you need it most? When you're in need, whether it's of something physical or whether it's a ride or whether it's a shoulder to cry on, who shows up for you when you need it the most? As most of you know, we're about 4 weeks out from Melissa had surgery 4 weeks ago, and we got to experience a little bit of this. Going into her surgery, I think a few of her friends reached out to her or talked to her, and they just kind of came to a consensus. Josh cannot be trusted with what food choices happen while Melissa's sick. And so they reached out and they organized some meals for us and got some meals prepared for us. And they brought those meals over to our house. They prepared the meals, brought them over. My father-in-law had a few more driving duties. He usually helps us get our kids to and from different places. We have 3 kids in 3 different schools, and we had friends who kind of helped as well. And just kind of during that time when she wasn't able to drive, they just kind of showed up for us in many different ways. And we're extremely grateful for that. And so I think it's important for us to have people in our lives who show up for us when we need it. So people showed up for us, but you know what else happened? People sacrificed for us. Not only did they show up for us, but they spent their own money, their own hard-earned money on food, and they prepared that, and then they brought it over to our house. They sacrificed time, they sacrificed gas money, all of those things that were a part of it just so they could help us as we were walking through those first days. We had people who brought us over meals after it happened, aside from those friends who brought meals over. We had people who don't even go to our church who are just friends of ours who called and asked if they could bring us food over. We got, Melissa got cards in the mail, lots of messages. The first couple weeks that she wasn't here, I had lots of people asking how she was doing and those things. People, they showed up for us. They sacrificed for us, and what they did was they served us. They realized that we were just at this time, she had just had surgery, and they just wanted to be there, and they wanted to be helpful, and they wanted to serve our family. They drove over, they came in our house, they brought the food in our house. There's restrictions on what she can carry and not carry and all those things. And so all of that happened. They showed up, they sacrificed, they served our family. Some people brought meals, some sent cards, some just texted, some prayed for us. A lot of people prayed for us. We appreciated that. Some encouraged us, some laughed with us in that process. We were, even during that process, Alora, her team had made it to State, and Jason and Kristen's daughter Addison had made it to State as well. And we were up in Ames together, and Addison performed at 10 something in the morning, and the Gearys would have been totally fine just leaving and going home, and they have 1,000 things going on in their lives too. But I know Kristen helps out in youth, and they didn't have to, but they stayed to watch the Lord's performance. Not because they had to, not because they didn't have better things to do, but it's just a picture of what happens when we show up for one another. We're there for one another in times. And this is what I really believe about the church. The church should be a place where people show up for one another. It should be a place where, all those things that I just mentioned, I'm sure you know this, they happen outside the walls of the church. We come to church, but we are the church. And so what happens is yes, it is important. I do think it is important. Part of showing up for one another is showing up to church. Because sometimes we just need a smile. We just need an encouraging word. We just need to see someone's face. We just need to get in a room and worship with other believers. We need to be around one another. Those are great things, but we show up for each other inside the church, and we show up for each other outside the church, in each other's lives. If you look at Mark chapter 10, Jesus has just predicted his death for the 3rd time, okay? It shouldn't have been a surprise of what was going to happen. And then something interesting happens in Mark chapter 10, verse number 35. there's these two disciples named James and John, and they have a kind of a side conversation with Jesus, and here's what they say to him. Verse 35, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. Teacher, Jesus, they said, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. I don't know about you, but I look at that, I'm like, that seems a little bit selfish. Hey, we want you to do for us what we tell you to do for us. Jesus responds and says, what do you want me to do for you? They replied, let one of us sit at your right and the other sit at your left in your glory. Once again, they assumed Jesus was coming to establish a physical kingdom on this earth. And so they wanted, while you're in your kingdom, we want one to sit on the right and one to sit on the left. We want to be close because sometimes people have this illusion that they think that they want it, because I know you're going to be in power, I'm going to be close to you and I'm going to have power. And if there's one thing we know about mankind loves the idea of power. And the disciples had that same idea. We want to be at your right, we want to be at your left. This is what we want from you. And Jesus replies to them, you don't know what you are asking. I think if there was Jesus responded to some of our prayer requests, he would say that exact same thing. You don't even know what you're asking. He says this, can you drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with? We can, they answered, the naive response. Oh, of course we can. You know, we think we can do what Jesus is asking of us. And he says, you will drink the cup I drink and be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with. It's not going to look like you think it will. Verse 40, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those whom they've been prepared. In other words, it's not my choice, it's my Father's choice. Verse 41, he goes on, he says, when the 10 heard about this, they must not have been privy or in the conversation, but they heard about it later. It says they became indignant with James and John. Of course they were upset. Jesus called them together and he begins to teach them something, which is so great about how Jesus is. And he says this, you know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. He's speaking to those people who are in power, or at least in perceived power. And he's saying they lord it over their people. They exercise authority over them. But he's telling the disciples there's a different way. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be a slave of all. Verse 45 is an underliner. It says, for the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Thing I love about Jesus, he doesn't just teach us things, but he shows us things. He isn't a God who just says, here's what you have to do, but he lives out what he teaches. He shows them, he paves the way for you, and he paves the way for me. We see the disciples coming to him, and they have this very selfish, this very short-sighted request of Jesus. And I think sometimes if we're not careful, we can do the same thing. But here's what we see, is that Jesus, we're gonna see him in several places in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We see this, that Jesus showed up for us. Jesus showed up for us. We look at Jesus and we love Christmas time and Emmanuel, God with us. We know that, but Jesus showed up for everyone. He showed up for the sinner. He showed up for the religious. He showed up for the leper. He showed up for the hypocrites. He showed up for the demon-possessed, the adulterer, the sick, the disciples, the Jew, the Gentile, the outcast, the well-accepted, the rich, the poor. You name it. He showed up for them. He didn't say, I'm only coming for these people. I'm only coming for these qualified people. I'm only coming for these people in these specific categories. He came for everyone. One of the greatest example of him just showing up for his friends was the story of Lazarus. I'm sure you've heard of this story before, but Lazarus was a good friend of Jesus, and he was dying, and his sisters, Mary and Martha, sent a message to Jesus saying, hey, the one who you love is sick. And he would have known that was Lazarus coming from those two. He had been in their home, he had loved them, and he had cared for them. And so here's Jesus. He hears this message, and he was at a different location. So it took him a few days to get the message to Jesus, and it was going to take a few days for Jesus to get there. But by the time Jesus got there, what happened? Most of you know the story. Lazarus was already dead. And Jesus goes and he speaks and he commands, and Lazarus comes forth and he comes back to life. And I look at that story and it's like, well, why didn't Jesus just show up a few days earlier? Why didn't Jesus just in other places, he had just spoke a word from a distance and someone was healed? Why didn't he just do that? Well, we see in this case, like many other places all throughout the scripture, is that there are times where Jesus just shows up for us, and it seems to look different on so many occasions. He shows up, and for some, he heals them. For some, we see him having conversations with people. For others, we see him offering friendship. We see sacrifice. We see love. We see the way that he teaches people. He shows up in almost every way imaginable. It's not just I'm showing up on a Sunday morning and I'll be there for you. It's in every way, shape, and form. So here's a question. Jesus shows up for everyone, and he shows up in many different ways. If we're going to show up for one another, what does that look like? It has to go beyond Sunday morning. I think we all understand that. But it's going to look like this. Of course, Sunday morning is going to be a part of that, but it's going to show up by maybe it's just sharing a meal together. Maybe it's going to be a call. Maybe it's going to be a text. For some people, you like to still send letters. It was nice. We got I know Melissa got at least one card from someone in our church, that someone who always sends cards when people are going through things. It's going to look a lot different for us. It might be a smile. It might be a prayer, letting people know that we're praying for them. It might be giving someone a night out. It might be babysitting their kids. It might be a conversation over coffee. It might be a walk with friends. It could be so many different things, but we show up for one another. Jesus showed up for us, and I believe if we're going to be a healthy church and a church that's doing what Jesus wants us to do, we're going to have to show up for one another. The second thing we see that Jesus does for us is that Jesus sacrificed for us. Jesus shows up for us, but Jesus sacrificed for us. I believe that the church should be a place where people sacrifice for one another. We sacrifice for each other. Rather than looking to our own needs, which is common and which is culture, it's all about me and it's about what I want. We need to look to the needs of others. What did Jesus do throughout his whole life? Obviously, we know he gave his life for us. We're going to celebrate the cross this morning and what Jesus did for us on the cross. He died for us, but what else did Jesus do? How else did he sacrifice for people? He gave them his time. One of the most precious commodities of our day is our time. He gave them patience. I'm sure he sacrificed sleep. He sacrificed his comforts. He left heaven. He sacrificed being misunderstood. Was there anybody who was more misunderstood by Jesus? Even his followers didn't understand, even after he was dead, some of the things they needed to know about him. He sacrificed completely everything for us. So what does that look like for us? Well, for a lot of things, it's going to mean that we're going to sacrifice our time. Something we hold very closely to. We like our time. We like to do our thing. We like to operate on our timetables, and we all have very busy lives and lots of things going on. But I think that's one of the things that we learn about Jesus, and in the midst of, I'm sure they had busy times of their lives as well back during this time, but he still always gave his time. People need our time. When people are going through things, they need our time. The other thing we sacrifice is our comfort. We're all creatures of comfort. We all love our comfort. We like our homes. We like to be at home. We like to be in our comfy clothes. We like to be sitting on comfy chairs. We like our comfort. And there are times where we have to sacrifice our comfort for the better of other people. This last week, we were kind of in a group chat. We went to Haiti several years ago with Jason, and Facebook is great for having some of those old memories that we got to experience together, and just some of those things. There was, if you leave America and go to a place like Haiti, you're going to sacrifice some of the comforts we have in America. Okay, our comfort, it's the comfort of home. It's the comfort of what we enjoy. We tend to be creatures of comfort, and we have to sacrifice those things. I don't know anyone who has given their life to the Lord that Jesus hasn't called them to sacrifice something for other people. You know, the other thing we sacrifice for people is we sacrifice money. I mentioned it earlier, our friends that made us meals, they had things in their closets or in their pantries, and food that they had either went out or bought or they had in their pantry, but that was things that they paid for. They sacrificed those things for other people. Lori came up a few minutes ago and talked about BGMC. And missions is one of those things we sacrifice ourselves, the money that we may have for the better of other people who may not have it and who have no access to certain things. We'll be learning about our project for this year, which I'm really excited. I know the youth has been talking a lot about it for Speed the Light, but we'll be kind of letting you as the church know about it in a couple weeks. But teaching our kids all about missions, teaching our kids that there's something bigger than just your life here. We live in such a self-saturated society. Everything revolves around me and my comfort. Look at Facebook or Instagram or any social media. They have these algorithms that cater specifically and directly to you. Every political person you like, you're going to see them in your feed. Every team that you like or every team that you don't like is in your feed. If you ever comment on a team that you don't like the San Francisco 49ers, somehow they start to show up in your feed all the time. That's why the Cowboys are in everybody's feed, because everybody hates on the Cowboys and they're all in everybody's feed and they just keep talking about them all the time. There's algorithms out there and they cater specifically to exactly to you and to the way you think or the way that they think that you think. We have to sacrifice of ourselves for others. You probably noticed when you walked in the church today, out there, there's a little tree out there that has a bunch of Easter eggs on it. And what we're asking you to do is to at least consider, there's a place in town called Sleep in Heavenly Peace. And there's this a need in Siouxland, which most of us probably would never even think of kids that don't even have a bed to sleep in at nighttime. And most of us in this room, that's never been a problem for us. And so to think or imagine that there's people in our community who don't have beds to sleep in. So you can buy a kid, you can do a bed, you can do sheets, you can do gloves, you can do safety glasses, you can do a DeWalt sander, you can do all sorts of different things that's on that tree. But we want you to consider sacrificing something for someone else. That's what we do, and that's what the church is for. The church should be a place where people sacrifice for one another. I'm going to say something that probably won't be too popular this morning, but going to church is not a sacrifice. You see, we give up those other things. We sacrifice those things to be in the Lord's house, to be with God and to connect with others. We've developed this mentality of, I've got to sacrifice and I've got to go to church. It's a privilege to go to church. There are people in other countries right now who would do anything to be able to have a worship team that would play music for them so they could sing and worship the Lord. They're being killed. They're being beaten. And we treat church sometimes as a huge sacrifice rather than sacrificing the things of this world and our agendas and our calendars to be at church. Something we should really be thoughtful about. Last thing is this. Jesus came to serve, not to be served. He says it right in the text, verse 45. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. You know, Jesus, while he was alive, we know he washed his disciples' feet. I mean, you think about that. Jesus, the Son of God, washing the dirty feet of his disciples. He spoke to these crowds, and some of them were far away from him. Some were full of religious people, but he took time to serve. He even called out. Do you know that him correcting the Pharisees was a way of serving the Pharisees and letting them know, hey, you're on the wrong track here. He spoke to individuals. Not just did he speak to crowds, but he spoke to individuals. The woman at the well, you look all throughout Scripture, you see he had these one-on-ones with people, and he spoke to them, he served them, he loved them. He healed some, he corrected some. He loved them. He showed that he loved them. He didn't just say it, he showed them. And we see that here in this text as he's saying to his disciples, there's a better way. There are people who are after power and they want people to serve them. And that's what they do, but that's not what we do. That's not what the disciples of Jesus do. And here's what he's teaching them, is that the disciples, and if we're disciples of Jesus, we're to be marked with humility, not by exerting any authority over others. We tend to think we've arrived when we get to tell other people what to do. But our job is to serve people. And so we have to be marked by humility. And we live in a culture that's constantly comparing ourselves to one another, and that I'm higher than this person, or I have more money than this person, or I have this that this person doesn't have. We compare ourselves all of the time. And oftentimes we make ourselves out to be better than other people. And Jesus constantly reminds us to be men and women of humility. And so the church should be a place where we show up for one another. We should sacrifice one another. The last thing is the church should be a place where we serve one another. Our lives should be characterized by serving one another and acting for the best interests of others, not by assuming that people are there to serve us. I consider our church very fortunate. We have an incredible group of volunteers here at this church, and they come early and often. There's a worship team that comes early every single week to prepare and to play and to sing and to try to get things, any kinks worked out, okay? Contrary to what you may understand or know, our worship team doesn't show up at 9:55 and just say, hey, what are we playing today? And then it all just magically comes together. No, there's practicing, there's preparation, there's greeters who show up early to church. There's Sunday school teachers who spend time during the week preparing their lesson to be ready for Sunday morning. There's so many ways that people serve in our church. We're supposed to be characterized by serving one another. You will not find in the New Testament that we're supposed to be bench warmers. I played sports throughout my life, and there were times where I sat on the bench. And in other words, I didn't really contribute a whole lot to my team. I didn't even really cheer for my team because I was mad that I was the one that was not on the court and they were. The church is not supposed to be a place where we just come and sit, but where we come and serve. We look to the needs of others rather than ourselves. And it's really difficult to do so because our society and even some churches, we have to be careful not to bend to this consumer mindset that the church, that we're supposed to come to church and it's supposed to offer us everything. That it's supposed to, that I'm going to come to church as a consumer and I'm going to consume. That's not the picture of the New Testament church. It's not to come to consume, it's to come and serve. And here's what we know. Jesus did not come into the world for himself, but for us. His life was not for himself, but for us. His death was not for himself, but it was for us. His resurrection was not for himself, but it was for us. His ascension into heaven was not for himself, but it was for us. And guess what? His second coming is not going to be for himself. It's going to be for us. We have got to have the mindset that I am here and I exist to serve the purposes of God. And some of that's going to look like different roles here within the church. Some of that's going to be, at home I might be taking a meal and some of those things I mentioned earlier. But we're here to serve one another. When you came in today, there was a sheet of paper on your chair. I want you to grab that out if you have it close to you. It says team descriptions and volunteer opportunities. The church, once again, we don't just show up on Sunday mornings and say, hey, who wants to volunteer today? Does anybody want to help in the nursery? Does anybody want to come clean the church this week? We don't do that. We plan and we prepare and we have everything set up ahead of time. And so typically each week we know who's serving in the nursery. We know who's going to be greeting. We know who's going to be helping sing on the worship team. We know all of those things ahead of time. But there are things that we do need help with, that we still need help with, and we still need to get more people to help us do here and to serve at the church. I think we can all agree it's better to have, it's not great for us to have one person doing three things. It'd be better to have three people doing one thing. Because we get burnt out the more and more things we do. And I have to do this, and I have to serve in the nursery, and I have to serve in this, and I have to serve in these. And there's nothing wrong with serving in a couple different places. But I do want us to understand that we all have a place. Every single one of us in this room, there's something you can do. And so if you look at that list, whether it's administration, some of you you love administrative things. You love tasks. You love just inputting things into Excel or things like that. Some of you, you have a listening ear. You might be able to help in sound and help us with be a soundboard operator. I know we've talked about that one several times in the past, but currently we have one person who's that they're showing up every single week to make sure that we have the sound that we need every single Sunday morning. And it would be great if even we had someone to step in one time a month, or maybe to come do 50-50, or maybe a third spread out among a few people. But there's a need for these things. We're not just throwing things out there. There's actual need for these things. Care ministry, some of you just love to chat with people. You love to connect with people. So for you, making calls or maybe following up on someone who's new to the church. Some of you are great with bringing meals, and we need to do a better job of when someone has surgery or when someone has a baby or some of those things, having meals prepared and kind of a meal train for those things. Maybe it's First Kids, where right now, we're getting ready to transition our kids from where they are in their room to a bigger room because we have more kids than we had before, and we want to give them the space and a new space for our kids and invest into the next generation. So maybe it's helping in our kids area, or maybe it's helping in youth. Pastor Tyler is probably not going to turn down volunteers to help in youth ministry and just some general areas. Greeters, we have a lot of great greeters, but anytime any of these things we can use more of. If you look on the back, facilities, buildings, and grounds, maybe you want to help in different areas. Maybe you're great at maintenance, or maybe you love to clean. Maybe you love to shovel snow. Some of those things that we do, and we just do to serve other people. Maybe you want to host a small group. This is one that I really hope we can have someone step into. It's a missions coordinator. We get lots of letters here at the church from our missionaries saying, hey, here's what's going on. And for me to keep up on every single missionary and to remember exactly what's going on in their life and what they need and what their prayer request is, I would love for someone to step into being a missions coordinator, and they communicate with our missionaries, and they email them, or they might say, hey, how can we be praying for you? Or hey, when can you come speak at our church? Those things. I would love to have someone who would be willing to do that. I'd love a local outreach coordinator, someone who's working with Sleep in Heavenly Peace or places like that where we can get involved in our community. Musicians, vocalists, all those different things. I think on your sheet, I think I put it on the bottom of it, on the back side. I think I put a wild card. Because there may be things that we don't have on the list that maybe you've done at a church before, or you might see a need that we don't have on here. So at the bottom of that sheet, you might just fill in, oh, hey, I think it'd be good if we had this ministry, or hey, I'd like to help serve in this capacity at the church. We have a place for your name and your phone number on the bottom of this, and so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take communion first, but here's what I'm going to ask you to do. In just a few moments, I'm going to ask Christian if he would be ready to put some quiet music on in just a moment, but we're just going to take 2 minutes here, and I want to give you an opportunity to look through this list and see if there's an area where you want to serve. And I know that some of you are already serving, and here's the deal. You might be serving in an area where you're just kind of like, I've kind of reached the end of that area and I want to move on to something different, and maybe it's on this list. Man, just let us know. All I want you to do is circle it or write in what you want to do, and I'm going to follow up with every single one of you. We want to make sure we get you plugged in. Here's what we know. If you want to have a more meaningful experience at church, it's going to involve you serving other people. It's just all littered throughout the New Testament. It's littered throughout what the church is supposed to be, men and women serving one another. And so I'm going to ask you, we're just going to put on some music and take 2 quick minutes. And if you would circle a few things, write your name and phone number, and then we're going to take communion together. And then there are 2 tables in the back of this room, and each one of them has a little file drawer. And all I'm going to ask you to do is, after service is over, I'm going to pray in just a moment over these. I'm going to ask you just to put this in those little trays on those back tables, and then I'd love to follow up with you. I really believe as we serve, some of you as you continue to serve, and as we serve, we see and get to live out the heart of God, serving one another. When we serve one another, we show up for one another. If you're serving in the nursery, guess what? You're showing up for a family, and you're allowing them to be in here while you're serving in there. There's so many different ways to serve, but it benefits other people. We show up for one another. It gives you another reason to show up at church for one another. We sacrifice for one another. Once again, if they're in the nursery today, they're sacrificing their time of being in here and worshiping and hearing the message and being around us so they can love on little kids this morning. And we serve one another. So I just want you to take a minute. I'm going to pray, and then I just want you to take a quick minute, and then after we do, we'll do communion together. But let's take a moment to pray, and then we'll just give you a quick minute to fill this out. Lord, I thank you that you're not just someone who tells us what we should do, but you're someone who modeled what we should do. You didn't just stand up in front of a crowd and tell them what to do. You modeled it. You washed your disciples' feet. You hung out with people who other people were unwilling to have conversations with, who were far away from you. And so, Lord, help us to find ways to serve one another and to love one another. And so, Lord, as people are processing through even these sheets and some of the things they may be seeing on the piece of paper in front of them, I pray that you would help us to find a place that our church experience will be more meaningful when we step in and serve other people. And so, Lord, give us the right place, give us the right fit, also that we can help and serve other people. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen.